The dust beneath Victoria's fingers had turned to mud from the water she used to soften the willow strips, and her stomach growled so loudly she worried the merchants in the square might hear it from where she sat in the shade of the general store in San Bernardino, California. It was 1878, and the small town had grown into a modest trading post where miners, ranchers, and travelers passed through on their way to somewhere better, somewhere that held more promise than this sun-scorched corner of the desert, where hope seemed to evaporate as quickly as morning dew. Victoria Cameron had been weaving baskets for 3 weeks now, ever since the fever took her father and left her with nothing but the small shack they had rented on the edge of town, and the skills her mother had taught her before passing 5 years prior. She was 22 years old, alone in a world that did not care much for women without family or protection, and the basket in her lap represented the difference between eating tonight and going to bed with an empty belly once again. The willow strips moved between her fingers with practiced ease, over and under, creating the tight weave that made her basket sturdy enough to carry everything from vegetables to small tools. She had 12 baskets completed now, arranged carefully on the blanket she had spread on the ground, each one slightly different in size and design. Some had handles, others were wide and shallow, perfect for gathering eggs or sorting beans. A few people had stopped to admire her work throughout the morning, commenting on the quality of her weaving, but no one had reached into their pockets to make a purchase. She tried not to let the disappointment show on her face, tried to keep her expression pleasant and inviting. But as the sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive, she felt her resolve beginning to crack. Her father had been a carpenter, a good one, but the work had dried up when his hands started shaking from the illness that eventually took his life. They had spent through their savings paying for medicine that did not work and doctors who could do nothing but shake their heads sadly. When he died, the landlord had given her 1 month to come up with the rent or find herself on the street. That deadline was 2 weeks away, and she had earned barely enough to buy flour and a bit of salt pork. The baskets were her last hope, the only skill she possessed that might translate into income. But San Bernardino was a practical town where people bought what they needed and nothing more, and most folks already had baskets. A shadow fell across her work, and Victoria looked up, squinting against the bright sunlight that formed a halo around the figure standing before her. For a moment, all she could see was the outline of a tall man in a wide-brimmed hat, and then he crouched down, bringing his face level with hers, and she found herself looking into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of the sky on a clear winter morning, startling in their intensity, set in a face that was tanned and weathered from long days in the sun. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat, and a strong jaw that had not seen a razor in a few days. "These are fine baskets," he said, and his voice was deep and warm with a slight drawl that suggested he came from somewhere south of California. "Did you make them yourself?" "Yes, sir," Victoria replied, sitting up straighter and trying to smooth her worn calico dress with one hand. "Every one of them. The willow comes from the creek bed north of town, and I soak it and weave it tight so the baskets hold their shape and do not fall apart even with heavy use." He picked up one of the larger baskets, turning it over in his hands and examining the weave with an attention to detail that surprised her. Most men would have given it a cursory glance and moved on, but this one studied the bottom, the sides, ran his fingers along the rim to check for rough edges. His hands were large and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard for a living, and she noticed rope burns on his wrists and forearms. "How much?" he asked, setting the basket down and meeting her eyes again. 50 cents for the small ones, $1 for the medium, and $1.50 for the large, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The prices were fair, maybe even a bit low, but she needed the sales more than she needed to drive a hard bargain. "I will take all of them," he said, and Victoria felt her heart skip a beat. "All of them," she repeated, certain she had misheard. "Every single one," he confirmed, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "How much does that come to?" Victoria's mind raced as she quickly counted up the total. $14.50, she said, hardly daring to believe this was happening. He counted out the money without hesitation, placing the coins in her palm, and the weight of them felt like a miracle. $14 would pay her rent with enough left over for food and supplies to make more baskets. It was more money than she had seen since her father died. "Thank you," she breathed, clutching the coins tightly. "Thank you so much, sir. You do not know what this means to me." "James," he said, tipping his hat to her. "James Walker. I run a ranch about 10 miles west of here up in the foothills, and I am going to need more baskets, a lot more if you are willing to make them." "More." Victoria felt dizzy, as though the heat and her empty stomach and this sudden reversal of fortune were all conspiring to make her faint. "How many more? Could you make me 2 dozen by the end of next week?" he asked. "I need them for the harvest. We grow vegetables and fruit, and we need sturdy baskets to gather everything and take it to market. The ones we have been using are falling apart, and I have been meaning to order new ones, but the quality is poor when they come from the merchants. These are exactly what I need." 2 dozen, Victoria repeated, her mind already calculating. That would be another $28 at least, possibly more if he wanted larger sizes. It was more money than she could have imagined making in a month. "Yes, I can do that. I can absolutely do that." "Good," James said, standing up and gathering the 12 baskets into a large pile. "I will send one of my men to town with a wagon to collect these. And miss, I did not catch your name." "Victoria Cameron," she said, getting to her feet and brushing the dust from her skirt. "I live in the small house at the eastern edge of town, the one with the blue door." "Victoria," he repeated, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "I will see you next week then, when I come to collect the new baskets. If you need anything, supplies or such, you let me know. I can advance you some money if it would help." "No, this is plenty," she said quickly, not wanting to seem greedy or desperate even though the offer tempted her. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. You have been more than generous." He nodded, gathered up the baskets, and walked away toward where his horse was tied in front of the saloon. Victoria watched him go, still clutching the coins in her hand, still not quite believing what had just happened. She had come to town this morning with a heavy heart and an empty stomach, and now she was going home with more money than she had seen in months and the promise of more work to come. It felt like a dream, like something that could not possibly be real, and she half expected to wake up on her thin mattress and find herself still broke and hungry. But the coins were solid and real in her hand, and when she went to the general store to buy flour, beans, coffee, and a bit of bacon, the merchant took them without question. She even bought herself a small bag of peppermint sticks, a luxury she had not allowed herself in over a year. Walking home with her supplies, Victoria felt lighter than she had in months, as though the weight that had been pressing down on her shoulders had suddenly lifted. Her house was small and shabby, with gaps in the walls where the wind blew through and a roof that leaked when it rained, but it was home. She set her supplies on the rough wooden table her father had made years ago and allowed herself a moment to simply stand there, breathing deeply, feeling the tight knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. She was not out of danger yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time since her father died, she felt like maybe she could survive this. Maybe she could build a life for herself despite everything. That evening, as she cooked herself a proper meal of beans and bacon, she thought about James Walker. There had been something different about him, something that set him apart from the other men she encountered in town. He had looked at her baskets with respect, had paid her fairly without trying to haggle down the price, had offered her more work without any suggestion that she might owe him something in return. In a world where most men saw a woman alone as either a nuisance or an opportunity to take advantage, his straightforward kindness had been startling. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, and then sat down with fresh willow strips to begin working on the new order. 24 baskets in a week was ambitious, but she could do it if she worked from dawn until dark. She would have to make another trip to the creek to gather more willow, and she would need to work faster than she had been, but the money was worth it. More than that, having steady work gave her a sense of purpose she had been missing, a reason to get up in the morning beyond simple survival. The next morning, Victoria rose before dawn and walked the 2 miles to the creek where the willow grew thick along the banks. She cut the straightest, most flexible branches she could find, bundling them carefully and carrying them back to her house in several trips. Her arms ached and her back protested, but she did not mind the physical labor. It felt good to be doing something productive, to be working toward a goal that seemed achievable. By noon, she had enough willow to start and had begun the process of soaking and stripping the bark. The work was meditative, requiring focus but leaving her mind free to wander, and she found her thoughts returning again and again to James Walker. She wondered what his ranch was like, what kind of man ran a farm that needed 24 new baskets. He had mentioned employees, which meant his operation was substantial, not just a small homestead. She wondered if he was married, then immediately chided herself for the thought. It did not matter whether he was married or not. He was a customer, someone who was giving her work when she desperately needed it, and that was all. But still, she could not quite forget the way his blue eyes had looked at her, direct and honest, without the calculating assessment she was used to seeing in men's faces. He had treated her like a craftsperson, like someone whose skill had value, and that alone was enough to make him stand out in her memory. The days blurred together in a rhythm of work and more work. Victoria's fingers moved constantly, weaving and shaping, creating basket after basket. She worked by candlelight long after the sun set, pushing herself to meet the deadline James had given her. The monotony of the work was broken only by trips to the creek for more willow and quick visits to town for supplies. She paid her rent to the landlord, who seemed surprised to receive the money, and bought herself a new length of fabric to make a dress that was not worn thin at the seams. By the end of the week, she had completed 24 baskets, each one as carefully crafted as the ones James had purchased before. She arranged them in her small house, barely leaving room to walk, and felt a surge of pride at what she had accomplished. These baskets represented not just income but proof that she could support herself, that she had a skill worth paying for. James arrived on Saturday morning, driving a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. Victoria heard the sound of wheels on the dirt road and hurried to the door, wiping her hands on her apron and trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. She had thought about this moment all week, had imagined what she would say to him, but now that he was here, all her prepared words fled from her mind. "Good morning, Victoria," he called out, climbing down from the wagon with easy grace. He was dressed much as he had been before, in worn denim trousers and a simple cotton shirt with a leather vest over it and that same wide-brimmed hat. "I hope I am not too early." "Not at all," she said, stepping outside and gesturing toward the house. "I have them all ready. 24 baskets, just as you asked." He followed her inside, and she watched his face as he took in the impressive array of baskets filling her small home. His eyes widened slightly, and then he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face from handsome to something approaching beautiful. "These are even better than the first batch," he said, picking up one of the baskets and examining it closely. "You do excellent work, Victoria. I mean that sincerely." "Thank you," she said, feeling warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. "I tried to make them as sturdy as possible since you said they were for harvest work." "They are perfect," he assured her. "Absolutely perfect. Let me help you load them into the wagon." They worked together to carry the baskets outside and arrange them carefully in the wagon bed. Victoria was acutely aware of James's presence beside her, the way his arm brushed against hers when they both reached for the same basket, the sound of his breathing, the faint scent of leather and hay and something else, something clean and masculine that she could not quite identify. Her heart was beating faster than the simple exertion warranted, and she felt foolish for being so affected by a man she barely knew. When the last basket was loaded, James pulled out his coin pouch and counted out $28, placing the money in her hand with the same straightforward manner as before. "This is for the baskets," he said, "and I have another proposition for you if you are interested." Victoria looked up at him, curious. "What kind of proposition? My ranch is getting busier, and I could use help with various tasks around the place," he said. "I need someone to help with preserving the harvest, managing the kitchen garden, that sort of thing. And I could use a steady supply of baskets, not just for one order but ongoing. Would you consider coming to work at the ranch? I have a small cabin that is not being used. You could live there, and I would pay you a fair wage in addition to buying all the baskets you can make." Victoria stared at him, her mind racing. Leave her small rented house and move to a ranch owned by a man she had met twice. It seemed reckless, possibly dangerous. She knew nothing about James Walker beyond the fact that he paid well and had kind eyes. But what did she really have to lose? This house was barely habitable, and she was always one missed rent payment away from being homeless. At the ranch, she would have steady work, a place to live, and the opportunity to continue making baskets without worrying about whether anyone would buy them. "I do not know," she said slowly. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Walker, but I hardly know you. How do I know this is a legitimate offer and not something else?" His expression became serious, and he took a step back, giving her space. "That is a fair question, and I respect you for asking it. The truth is, you do not know, not for certain. But I can tell you that I run an honest operation. I have 3 other employees who live on the ranch, 2 men and a woman who does the cooking and housekeeping. The cabin I am offering is separate from the main house, and you would have your privacy. I would never expect or ask for anything beyond honest work for honest pay. If you would like, you could come out and see the place before you decide. Talk to the others who work there. See for yourself what kind of operation I run." Victoria considered this. His offer was reasonable, and the fact that he had not taken offense at her caution spoke well of him. "I would like that," she said finally. "I would like to see the ranch before I make a decision." "Of course," James said, his face relaxing into a smile again. "Would tomorrow suit you? I could pick you up in the morning and bring you back in the evening." "Tomorrow would be fine," Victoria agreed. "Thank you for understanding." "Thank you for considering it," he replied, climbing back onto the wagon. "I will be here at 8 o'clock, and Victoria, I mean what I said. I need the help, and you clearly have skills beyond just basket weaving. I think we could have a good working arrangement." She watched him drive away, the wagon loaded with her baskets, and felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. This could be a real opportunity, a chance to escape the precarious existence she had been leading, but it could also be a mistake. She spent the rest of the day trying to decide what to wear, what questions to ask, how to evaluate whether this was a wise decision or a dangerous one. That night, she lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the future. For so long, her life had been about simple survival, about making it through one more day, one more week. Now, suddenly, there was the possibility of something more, something approaching security and stability. It was frightening how much she wanted it, how much she wanted to believe that James Walker was exactly what he appeared to be, an honest man offering honest work. Morning came too slowly and too quickly all at once. Victoria dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the green in her hazel eyes, and pinned her dark hair up in a neat bun. She had packed a small bag with a few personal items, just in case she decided to stay, though she had not quite admitted that possibility to herself. When James arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, she was waiting outside, her hands clasped together to keep them from trembling. "Ready?" he asked, helping her up onto the wagon seat beside him. "Ready," she confirmed, though her heart was pounding hard enough that she thought he might hear it. They rode west out of San Bernardino, following a rough road that climbed gradually into the foothills. James kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. He explained that he had bought the ranch 3 years ago, after working as a cowboy on various spreads throughout California and Nevada. He had saved his money carefully and invested it in land that others thought was too dry and difficult to farm. But he had found underground springs and built an irrigation system that allowed him to grow vegetables and fruit trees. "Most people around here focus on cattle," he said, guiding the horses around a rocky outcrop. "But I figured there was money to be made in produce, especially with the mining camps always needing fresh food. It has been hard work, harder than I expected, but it is starting to pay off. This year's harvest is going to be the best yet." Victoria listened, impressed by his dedication and vision. She asked questions about the irrigation system and the types of crops he grew, and he answered enthusiastically, clearly passionate about his work. The more he talked, the more she relaxed. There was nothing threatening or dishonest about James Walker. He was simply a young man trying to build something, working hard to make his dream a reality. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill, and Victoria caught her breath at the sight. The main house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and a solid roof. Beyond it, she could see fields laid out in neat rows, green with growing plants, and several outbuildings that looked to be in good repair. Trees had been planted around the house, providing shade, and she could hear the sound of water running through irrigation ditches. It was an oasis in the dry landscape, evidence of hard work and careful planning. "That is the bunkhouse where my 2 field hands stay," James said, pointing to a small building near the barn. "And that is the main house. The cabin I mentioned is over there, behind those trees." He drove the wagon to the cabin, and Victoria climbed down to get a better look. It was small but charming, with a stone chimney and glass windows that were a luxury in these parts. The door was painted a cheerful yellow, and someone had planted flowers in a small garden beside the front step. "The woman who used to live here moved back east to be with family," James explained, coming to stand beside her. "I have been using it for storage, but it would not take much to make it livable again. It has a good stove, a proper bed, even a few pieces of furniture." "Can I look inside?" Victoria asked. "Of course," James said, producing a key and unlocking the door. The interior was dusty but surprisingly spacious, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, a separate bedroom, and even a small alcove that could be used for storage or as a workspace. Victoria walked slowly through the space, imagining how it would look cleaned and furnished with her few belongings. It was nicer than anywhere she had lived in years, certainly better than the leaking shack she was renting in town. "What do you think?" James asked from the doorway, giving her space to explore. "It is lovely," Victoria said honestly. "Much nicer than where I am staying now." "Come meet the others," James suggested. "Then you can make an informed decision." They walked to the main house, where a woman in her 40s was hanging laundry on a line strung between two posts. She had graying hair and a round, friendly face that broke into a smile when she saw them approaching. "Martha, this is Victoria Cameron," James said. "She is the one I told you about who makes the excellent baskets. Victoria, this is Martha Green. She keeps this place running and makes sure we all eat properly." "Pleased to meet you," Martha said, wiping her hands on her apron and shaking Victoria's hand firmly. "James has been singing your praises all week. Those baskets are exactly what we needed." "Thank you," Victoria said, warming to the older woman immediately. "It is nice to meet you too. Are you considering joining us?" Martha asked. "I would surely welcome another woman around here." "It gets tiresome being outnumbered by men all the time," Victoria laughed. "I am thinking about it." "Well, if you want an honest opinion, this is a good place to work," Martha said. "James is fair, always pays on time, and treats everyone with respect. I have worked in a lot of places over the years, and this is one of the best." The two field hands, brothers named Tom and Daniel, were working in the vegetable fields but came up to the house for lunch. They were both in their 30s, weathered and quiet but polite when James introduced them. Victoria could see the respect they had for their employer in the way they spoke to him, the easy camaraderie that suggested they were treated well. After lunch, James showed her around the rest of the ranch, explaining his plans for expansion and improvement. He talked about his dreams for the place with an enthusiasm that was contagious, and Victoria found herself getting caught up in his vision. She could see herself here, weaving baskets in the cabin, helping with the harvest, being part of something larger than just her own survival. As the afternoon wore on and they prepared to head back to town, Victoria realized she had already made her decision. She wanted this opportunity, wanted the security and purpose it offered, wanted to be part of what James was building here. But more than that, if she was completely honest with herself, she wanted to be near him, to see more of the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "I would like to accept your offer," she said as they climbed back onto the wagon. "When would you want me to start?" James's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "That is wonderful news. Would a week be enough time for you to settle your affairs in town?" "More than enough," Victoria assured him. "I do not have much to pack or move." "I will send Tom with the wagon next Saturday to help you move your things," James said. "And Victoria, I am glad you are going to join us. I think you will be happy here." As they rode back toward San Bernardino, Victoria felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was the right decision, she was sure of it. She was embarking on a new chapter of her life, one that held promise and possibility. She glanced at James, noting the strong line of his profile, the capable way he handled the horses, and felt that flutter in her chest again. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that this was a business arrangement, nothing more. James Walker was her employer, and she needed to maintain proper boundaries. But as the week passed and she prepared for the move, Victoria could not quite suppress the excitement that bubbled up whenever she thought about the ranch and the man who owned it. She sold or gave away the few pieces of furniture she owned, packed her clothes and personal belongings into 2 small trunks, and said goodbye to the landlord with a sense of relief. She was closing the door on this difficult chapter of her life and opening a new one. Tom arrived precisely on time Saturday morning with the wagon, and he helped her load her belongings with quiet efficiency. The drive to the ranch felt shorter this time, perhaps because Victoria was no longer nervous about the unknown. When they arrived, Martha came out to greet her with a warm hug and helped her carry her things into the cabin. "I aired it out and gave it a good cleaning," Martha said, gesturing around the space. "James wanted to make sure it was comfortable for you." "It is perfect," Victoria said, looking around at the gleaming surfaces and the fresh curtains someone had hung at the windows. "Thank you so much. James is out checking the irrigation ditches, but he said to tell you to settle in today and that work starts tomorrow," Martha continued. "And you come over to the main house for meals. I will not have you trying to cook for yourself after working all day." Victoria unpacked her belongings, finding places for everything in the cabin that was now her home. She hung her dresses in the small wardrobe, arranged her mother's few keepsakes on a shelf, and set up a workspace by the window where the light was good for weaving baskets. By evening, the cabin felt cozy and lived in, a real home rather than just temporary shelter. She walked over to the main house for dinner, feeling slightly nervous about this new arrangement, but Martha and the men made her feel welcome. James arrived just as they were sitting down to eat, dusty and tired from a long day of work, and his face brightened when he saw Victoria. "You are all settled in?" he asked, taking the chair across from her. "Yes, thank you," she replied. "The cabin is wonderful." "Good," he said, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "I am glad you are here." The meal was simple but delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. Victoria found herself laughing at stories Tom and Daniel told about mishaps on the ranch, and she shared some of her own experiences growing up with her father. James mostly listened, but when he did speak, his comments were thoughtful and often amusing. Victoria noticed the way he treated everyone at the table with equal respect, the way he asked for their opinions and actually listened to the answers. This was a man who valued people, who saw them as individuals rather than just tools to accomplish his goals. After dinner, James walked her back to her cabin, carrying a lantern to light the way. The night was cool and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They walked slowly, not speaking, and Victoria was aware of every small sound, the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel path, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through the trees. "I want you to know that you are safe here," James said when they reached her door. "If you ever need anything, or if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you come tell me right away." "Thank you," Victoria said softly. "I appreciate that." He tipped his hat to her and walked away, and she went inside, closing the door and leaning against it with her eyes closed. Her new life had begun, and she had no idea where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. The next weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Victoria spent her mornings weaving baskets, producing a steady supply for the ranch and extras that James took to sell at the market in town. The money he paid her was more than fair, and for the first time since her father died, she had savings that she kept in a small tin box under her bed. In the afternoons, she helped with various tasks around the ranch, working alongside Martha to preserve vegetables, mend clothes, and manage the endless chores that came with running a working farm. The work was hard but satisfying, and Victoria fell into bed each night pleasantly exhausted. She grew stronger, her arms developing muscle from weaving and carrying, her skin turning golden from hours spent in the sun. She felt healthier than she had in years, eating regular meals and sleeping soundly without the constant anxiety that had plagued her in town. But more than the physical improvements, Victoria felt herself coming alive in ways she had not expected. She laughed more, smiled more, engaged with the world around her instead of just trying to survive it. Much of this new lightness could be attributed to the ranch itself and the sense of community among the people who lived there. But if she was honest with herself, a significant part of it was due to James. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, admiring the way he moved with such confidence and purpose, the way he treated his animals with gentle care, the way his face softened when he smiled. He was unfailingly kind to her, always asking if she needed anything, complimenting her work, including her in decisions about the ranch. But he maintained a respectful distance, never overstepping the bounds of employer and employee, and Victoria was not sure whether to be relieved or disappointed by his propriety. One evening in late summer, after a particularly successful day at the market where all of her baskets had sold for premium prices, James asked her to take a walk with him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had finally cooled from the heat of the day. "I wanted to thank you," he said as they walked along the irrigation ditch, watching the water flow past. "The ranch is doing better than I ever expected, and a lot of that is because of you. Your baskets have become known at the market. People ask for them specifically." "I am glad I can contribute," Victoria said, pleased by the praise but also feeling something more, a warmth that spread through her chest whenever he looked at her. "It is more than that," James continued, stopping and turning to face her. "You have brought something to this place beyond just your work. Everyone is happier when you are around. I am happier when you are around." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "James, I know I am your employer, and I know I should probably keep this professional," he said, and she could see the struggle on his face. "But I need you to know that I have feelings for you, Victoria. Real feelings. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I fall asleep. If that makes you uncomfortable, I will do my best to keep it to myself, but I could not go on without being honest about how I feel." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "You are not alone in those feelings," she said softly. "I have been trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is just gratitude or appreciation for the opportunity you gave me, but it is more than that. Much more." James reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, and the simple touch sent electricity racing through her veins. "I have been trying to court you properly," he said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "But I am not very good at it. I have spent the last 3 years working so hard on this ranch that I forgot how to talk to a woman I care about." "You have been doing fine," Victoria assured him, squeezing his hand. "Better than fine. You have treated me with respect and kindness, and that means more than any fancy words or grand gestures." "Can I kiss you?" James asked, and the vulnerability in his voice, the way he asked permission rather than just taking what he wanted, made Victoria fall even harder for him. "Yes," she whispered. He cupped her face gently in his hands and lowered his lips to hers, and Victoria felt the world tilt on its axis. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but then it deepened, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer to him. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for so long," he admitted. "Why did you wait?" Victoria asked. "I wanted you to feel secure here first, to know that your place on this ranch was not dependent on anything beyond your work," James explained. "I never wanted you to feel pressured or obligated." but I have been going out of my mind, being near you every day and not being able to tell you how I feel." "Well, now you have told me," Victoria said, smiling up at him. "And now I am telling you that I feel the same way. I think I started falling for you the day you bought all my baskets in town. No one had ever looked at my work the way you did, like it mattered, like I mattered." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and James kissed her again at the door, a long, sweet kiss that left her dizzy with happiness. That night, Victoria lay in bed unable to sleep, her mind replaying every moment of their conversation, every touch, every look. She had not expected to find love when she came to the ranch. She had been looking for survival, for security, but instead she had found something infinitely more precious. Over the following months, their relationship deepened and grew. James courted her properly, despite her protests that they were past that point. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, sat with her in the evenings while she wove baskets, read aloud to her from the newspapers he brought back from town. They took long walks together, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's hopes and dreams and fears. Martha watched their courtship with obvious approval, making comments about how nice it was to see James finally thinking about something besides work, and how Victoria glowed these days. Tom and Daniel were more circumspect, but Victoria caught them grinning when James found excuses to be wherever she was working. As autumn approached and the harvest came in, Victoria worked harder than she ever had in her life, weaving baskets and helping to gather vegetables and fruit. The ranch was a hive of activity, and everyone pitched in from dawn until well after dark. But even exhausted and dusty, Victoria had never been happier. She was part of something, contributing to a shared goal, and she was doing it alongside a man she loved more with each passing day. One evening in October, after the last of the harvest had been gathered and sold, James asked Victoria to come to the main house after dinner. She found him waiting on the porch, looking nervous in a way she had never seen him before. He took her hand and led her to sit on the porch steps, and in the golden light of sunset, he pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have been thinking about how to do this for weeks," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "I thought about waiting for some perfect moment, but then I realized that every moment with you is perfect. Victoria Cameron, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, of course yes." James slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply, and from inside the house, Victoria heard Martha let out a whoop of joy. The older woman came rushing out, followed by Tom and Daniel, and suddenly everyone was laughing and congratulating them, and James was hugging her close while she cried happy tears into his shirt. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony in San Bernardino, with Martha and the brothers as witnesses and a small gathering of friends from town. Victoria wore a new dress she had sewn herself from ivory silk that James had brought her from a trip to Los Angeles, and she carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. James wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Victoria's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the front of the church. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with such tenderness that Victoria felt her heart might overflow with happiness. They celebrated with a dinner at the ranch that Martha had been preparing for days. And as the sun set and lanterns were lit, Victoria danced with her husband under the stars, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. Their wedding night was gentle and loving, James treating her with such care and reverence that Victoria fell even deeper in love with him. They lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked about the future they would build together. "I want this ranch to be ours now," James said, stroking her hair. "Not mine, but ours. I want you to be my full partner in everything." "I already feel like I am," Victoria replied, "but thank you for saying it." "I mean it legally too," James insisted. "I am going to talk to the lawyer in town and have the deed changed to include your name. If something happens to me, I want you to be protected." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Victoria said firmly, but she was touched by his thoughtfulness. In a time when women had few legal rights, especially regarding property, his offer was a significant gesture of trust and respect. As winter approached, they settled into married life. Victoria moved her things from the cabin into the main house, and she transformed James's rather Spartan bedroom into a cozy sanctuary filled with her touches. She hung curtains, brought in flowers, added quilts and pillows until the space felt like a true home. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, and Victoria marveled at how natural it all felt, as though they had been together for years rather than months. In December, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she finally told James, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, and then carefully set her down and apologized for being too rough. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Victoria told him, cupping his face in her hands. "And you are going to be an amazing mother," James replied, kissing her softly. "Our child is the luckiest baby in the world." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Victoria had to give up some of the heavier ranch work as her belly grew. She continued to weave baskets, finding the rhythmic work soothing, and Martha clucked over her like a mother hen, making sure she ate enough and rested regularly. James was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if she should sit down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Victoria told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know," James said, looking sheepish. "I just want to make sure you are safe and healthy." "We are both fine," Victoria assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her belly so he could feel the baby moving. "Feel that, strong as a horse." James's face softened with wonder, and he knelt down, pressing his ear to her belly. "Hello in there," he murmured. "This is your papa. I cannot wait to meet you." Victoria ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with love for this man who was so strong and capable in every other aspect of his life, but turned into a sentimental puddle when it came to their unborn child. She had come so far from the desperate, hungry woman weaving baskets in the town square, and sometimes she could hardly believe this was her life now, that she had been blessed with a husband who loved her, a home that was truly hers, and a baby on the way. In early summer, after a labor that lasted through the night, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby boy. James was beside himself with joy, cradling his son with such tenderness that Victoria fell in love with him all over again. They named him Thomas Walker, after James's father who had died when James was young, and from the moment he entered the world, Tommy was the center of their universe. Martha was an enthusiastic grandmother figure, taking over much of the housework so Victoria could focus on the baby. Tom and Daniel competed for who could make the baby smile first, and the ranch, which had been a place of work and productivity, became filled with the sounds of a baby's laughter and cries. Victoria marveled at how naturally motherhood came to her. She had worried during the pregnancy that she would not know what to do, that she would somehow fail at this most important task, but her instincts proved strong. She nursed Tommy and rocked him to sleep and learned to interpret his different cries, and James was a devoted father, getting up in the night to change diapers and walking the floor with his son when Tommy was fussy. As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. James had been right about there being money in produce, and their vegetables and fruit were now in demand not just at the local market, but in Los Angeles and San Diego. They hired 2 more workers to help with the expanded operation, and Victoria hired a young woman from town to help with the basket weaving, teaching her the skills her own mother had taught her. Life was full and busy and sometimes exhausting, but Victoria had never been happier. She had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined that day in San Bernardino, when she sat in the dust with her 12 baskets, hoping someone would buy even one. She had a husband who loved her deeply, a son who was the light of their lives, work that was fulfilling, and a home that was truly hers. When Tommy was 2 years old, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more sickness and exhaustion, but James and Martha took over as much as they could to let her rest. Victoria continued to weave when she felt up to it, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm, and Tommy would sit beside her, trying to copy her movements with pieces of yarn. Their daughter was born in late autumn, during the first cold snap of the season. Emma Walker came into the world screaming her displeasure at the temperature, and she continued to be a vocal and opinionated child from that moment forward. Where Tommy was quiet and thoughtful, Emma was loud and adventurous, keeping them all on their toes. James adored both his children equally, but Victoria sometimes caught him watching Emma with a special softness in his eyes. His daughter had him wrapped around her tiny finger from the start, and Victoria teased him about being too indulgent, even as she found herself equally charmed by their strong-willed little girl. The years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. The ranch expanded further, and James built a new barn and a proper workshop for Victoria's basket weaving. Tommy started school in town, riding there and back each day on his pony, and Emma declared she wanted to go too, even though she was too young. Victoria's baskets had become something of a regional specialty, sold in stores throughout Southern California, and she had trained 3 more young women in the craft, giving them the same opportunity James had once given her. On their 5th wedding anniversary, James surprised Victoria with a trip to San Francisco, arranging for Martha to watch the children for a week. It was the first time they had been alone together since Tommy was born, and Victoria felt like a young bride again as they explored the city, ate in fine restaurants, and stayed in a beautiful hotel overlooking the bay. "You ever regret it?" James asked one evening as they stood on the hotel balcony watching the sun set over the water. "Giving up your independence to marry me?" Victoria turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "I did not give up my independence. I gained a partner. There is a difference." "You could have built a business on your own, made your own way," James persisted. "I could have," Victoria agreed, "but I would not have been as happy as I am now. You gave me the foundation to build from, James. Without that first order of baskets, without your faith in my skills and your offer of work, I would have ended up on the streets or married to some man who saw me as property rather than a person. You saved me, and then you loved me, and then you gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. I have never regretted a single moment." James pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I was so afraid that day in the town square that you would say no when I asked you to come to the ranch. You were so beautiful and proud, sitting there with your baskets, and I thought there was no way someone like you would want anything to do with a rough rancher like me." "Someone like me," Victoria laughed. "James, I was starving and desperate. I was 2 weeks away from being homeless. You were like an angel appearing out of nowhere. "Well, if I was your angel, you were mine," James said. "This ranch was just a place before you came. You made it a home." They stayed up late that night, talking about everything and nothing, reconnecting as individuals rather than just parents and business partners. When they returned to the ranch, refreshed and renewed, Victoria felt grateful not just for the trip, but for the life they had built, for the partnership that had grown stronger with each passing year. More years passed, bringing both joy and challenges. There were hard winters when the irrigation system froze and they lost part of the crop, and hot summers when water was scarce. Martha developed arthritis and had to cut back on her work, though she refused to retire completely. Tom got married to a woman from town and moved into his own homestead, though he continued to work for James. Daniel decided to try his luck in the Alaska gold rush and headed north, sending occasional letters about his adventures. Through it all, Victoria and James faced everything together, their partnership growing deeper with each challenge overcome. They added 2 more children to their family, another boy and another girl, and the house rang with the sounds of children playing and laughing. Victoria still wove baskets, though not as many as she once had, and she took pride in the business she had built, training young women and giving them skills that would serve them throughout their lives. Tommy grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, working alongside James and learning every aspect of the operation. Emma proved to have a head for numbers and took over managing the books and sales. Their younger children were still finding their way, but Victoria had no doubt they would carve out their own paths in time. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Martha, now in her 60s but still spry, had baked an enormous cake. Tom and his wife had brought their 3 children. Friends from town and the surrounding ranches came to honor the couple who had built something special in the foothills above San Bernardino. As Victoria stood on the porch, watching James play with his grandchildren, she thought back to that day in town when she had been weaving baskets just to survive, when the future had seemed bleak and uncertain. She thought about how one act of kindness, one man seeing value in her work and in her, had changed the entire course of her life. James caught her eye across the yard and smiled, that same smile that had made her heart flutter all those years ago. He excused himself from the children and came to her, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About baskets," Victoria said with a smile, "and about how grateful I am that you bought them all that day." "Best investment I ever made," James replied, kissing her temple. "Though I have to admit, I did not need 12 baskets. I bought them because I could not take my eyes off the beautiful woman who made them." "You never told me that," Victoria said, turning to look at him in surprise. "I figured you had already figured it out," James said with a grin. "I fell in love with you that first day, sitting in the dust with your baskets and your pride. I knew right then that I wanted to know you better, wanted to find a way to keep you in my life. The baskets were just an excuse." "James Walker, are you telling me that our entire life together started with a lie?" Victoria asked, but she was laughing. "Not a lie, just a creative interpretation of my needs," James protested. "I did need baskets, just maybe not quite that many quite that quickly." Victoria shook her head, still smiling. "Well, I am glad you did, whatever your reasoning. Those baskets brought you into my life and you gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," James corrected. "That is what partnership means." They stood together on the porch, watching their family and friends celebrate around them, and Victoria felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. Her life had not always been easy, and there had been struggles and sorrows along the way, but standing here with James, surrounded by the life they had built together, She knew she would not change a single moment. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Victoria leaned into her husband's embrace and smiled. She had been weaving baskets to survive, and a cowboy had bought them all and ordered more. But what they had built together was so much more than a simple business transaction. It was a love story, a partnership, a life full of meaning and purpose. The party continued late into the evening, with music and dancing and laughter echoing across the ranch. Victoria danced with James under the stars, just as they had on their wedding night, and she thought about how far they had come, how much they had built, how deeply they loved each other. In the years that followed, as they grew older and eventually passed the ranch on to their children, Victoria never stopped being grateful for that day in San Bernardino when a young cowboy with kind blue eyes had seen her sitting with her baskets and decided to change both of their lives. She never stopped being grateful for the love they had built, the family they had raised, the partnership that had sustained them through everything. And on quiet afternoons, when the work was done and the house was peaceful, Victoria would still sit by the window and weave baskets, her fingers moving in the patterns her mother had taught her so long ago. The baskets no longer meant survival. They meant remembrance, a connection to the past and to the moment when her life had changed forever. James would often sit with her during those quiet times, reading or just watching her work, and sometimes he would reach over and take her hand, and they would sit in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Their story became part of the local lore, the tale of the woman who wove baskets to survive and the cowboy who loved her enough to buy them all. But for Victoria and James, it was not a story. It was their life, their love, their legacy. It was everything they had built together, starting with 12 baskets in the dust and growing into a love that would last forever, passed down through generations. A testament to what two people could create when they chose to see value in each other and build something together. As they entered their twilight years, with grandchildren and even great-grandchildren running through the ranch they had built, Victoria and James would sit together on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they loved. And sometimes Victoria would turn to her husband and say, "Thank you for buying my baskets that day." And James would reply, as he always did, "Thank you for weaving them." It was a simple exchange, but it contained everything: their entire history, their love, their gratitude for the life they had been blessed to share. They had started with so little, just baskets and faith and a willingness to take a chance on each other, and they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch continued to prosper under their children's management, and the basket weaving business Victoria had started grew into a cooperative that employed dozens of women throughout the region, giving them the same opportunity for independence and security that James had once given her. It was a legacy she was proud of, knowing that her skills and her willingness to share them had changed lives just as her own life had been changed. When Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, the entire community mourned. She had been a fixture at the ranch for over 30 years, and her kindness and wisdom had touched everyone who knew her. Victoria grieved deeply for the woman who had been like a mother to her, but she took comfort in knowing that Martha had lived a full and happy life, surrounded by people who loved her. Tommy took over full management of the ranch when James decided it was time to step back, though James still came out to the fields most days, unable to fully retire from the work he loved. Emma opened a store in San Diego that sold not just baskets but other crafts from local artisans, and she proved to have inherited her father's business sense, and her mother's eye for quality. Their younger children found their own paths, one becoming a teacher, another a doctor, each contributing to their community in different ways. Victoria and James watched with pride as their children and grandchildren grew and thrived, building on the foundation that had been laid with 12 baskets and an act of kindness. One spring morning, when Victoria was 70 years old, she woke up to find James already awake, watching her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away even after all these years. "What?" she asked, reaching up to smooth her white hair, self-conscious about how she must look first thing in the morning. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," James said, taking her hand and kissing it. 50 years married to you, and I fall more in love every day." 50 years, Victoria marveled, shaking her head. "Where did the time go?" "Into every laugh, every tear, every moment we have shared," James replied, "and I would not trade a single second of it." They celebrated their 50th anniversary with a massive party that brought together family and friends from across California. The ranch was decorated with flowers and lanterns, and tables were laden with food that had been prepared by their children and grandchildren. Victoria wore a new dress in the same shade of ivory as her wedding gown, and James wore his best suit, and when they renewed their vows in front of everyone they loved, there was not a dry eye in the crowd. As they danced their first dance as a newly recommitted couple, Victoria looked around at the faces surrounding them, at the family they had created, at the life they had built, and she felt overwhelming gratitude. She had been so lost once, so afraid and alone, and James had found her and loved her and given her a reason to hope again. "I love you," she whispered in his ear as they swayed to the music. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." "And I love you," James replied. "My basket weaver, my wife, my partner in everything." The celebration continued long into the night, and when Victoria finally collapsed into bed, exhausted but happy, James held her close and they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had done for 50 years. Time moved forward, as it always did, bringing changes and challenges. James's health began to decline, his strong body finally showing the effects of a lifetime of hard work. Victoria nursed him tenderly, sitting by his bedside when he was too weak to get up, reading to him, holding his hand, reminding him of all the wonderful memories they had created together. "No regrets?" she asked him one afternoon when he was having a particularly difficult day. "Not a single one," James assured her, squeezing her hand with what strength he had left. "Every moment with you was a gift, Victoria. Every single moment." "You gave me a life," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You were always valuable, always worthy of love," James corrected gently. "I just had the privilege of being the one to show you that." He lived for another 3 years, each day a gift they cherished, before passing peacefully in his sleep with Victoria holding his hand. She grieved deeply for the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything for over half a century, but she did not regret the loss because she had been so blessed by what they shared. At James's funeral, the church in San Bernardino was packed with people whose lives he had touched. Victoria listened as person after person stood up to talk about James's generosity, his kindness, his integrity, and she felt proud that she had shared her life with such a remarkable man. But what she remembered most, what sustained her in the lonely days that followed, were the quiet moments, the everyday instances of love and partnership that had made up their life together. The way he brought her coffee in the morning, the way he listened when she talked about her day, the way he held her when she was sad, the way he celebrated her victories as though they were his own. Victoria lived for another 8 years after James's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, continuing to weave baskets almost until the very end. She taught her great-grandchildren the skills her mother had taught her, passing down not just the craft, but the story of how those baskets had changed her life, how a young cowboy had seen value in her work and had chosen to build a life with her. When Victoria finally passed away at the age of 81, peacefully in her sleep, she was laid to rest beside James on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. Her funeral was even larger than his had been, with women coming from all over California to pay their respects to the woman who had taught them to weave baskets, who had given them skills and confidence and a way to support themselves. But her greatest legacy was not the baskets or the ranch, or even the business she had created. Her greatest legacy was the love she had shared with James, a love that had started with 12 baskets in the dust and had grown into something that touched countless lives and would be remembered for generations to come. Their children continued the ranch and the basket weaving cooperative, honoring their parents' memory by maintaining the values of hard work, integrity, and kindness that Victoria and James had lived by. And when anyone asked about the history of the ranch, they would tell the story of the woman who was weaving baskets to survive and the cowboy who bought them all and ordered more. A story that became legend but was grounded in the simple truth of two people who found each other when they needed each other most and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond.